Welcome to today's Explainer. We're about to explore an event that honestly feels like a dark, underwater geopolitical thriller, but tragically, it was entirely real. We're heading back to August of 2000, right into the freezing, stormy waters of the Barents Sea. We're going to look at the sudden, chilling disappearance of a massive Russian nuclear submarine during a huge naval exercise. It's universally considered one of the deadliest, most mysterious naval disasters in modern history. A disaster that unfolded completely in the shadows, far, far beneath the ocean's surface. But before we even get into the complex machinery, the military strategy, and the geopolitical tension, we really have to ground ourselves in the stark human stakes. When this colossal vessel vanished beneath those rough Arctic waters, there were exactly 118 sailors on board. Every single cascading failure, every agonizing moment of confusion we are about to cover, it directly impacted the lives of these 118 men, trapped in a literal submerged nightmare.
Part 1. The Pride of Russia.
See, this wasn't just any submarine. The Kursk was considered one of the absolute most advanced vessels in the entire Russian fleet. Designed back in the Cold War era, it was a total beast of a machine, built specifically for large-scale naval warfare. Just picture it for a second. These narrow, cold steel corridors lined with pipes, dim emergency lighting reflecting off metallic walls, glowing control panels. Heavily armed with massive torpedo payloads and, yes, full nuclear warfare capabilities. The sheer defensive and offensive might of the Kursk created this profound sense of military confidence, a feeling of utter invulnerability. And honestly, that's exactly what makes the events that followed so deeply shocking.
Part 2. Disaster beneath the ice. It's August 2000. At exactly 11:28 a.m., deep within the submarine's forward torpedo compartment, something goes terribly, terribly wrong. A faulty torpedo triggers a sudden, violent explosion. Imagine warning lights instantly flashing red, sparks and thick smoke rapidly filling that cramped metal space. This initial blast completely tore through the forward section, crippling critical systems and instantly killing several crew members. But then, it gets worse. Just 2 minutes later, at 11:30 a.m., a second detonation hit. And this wasn't just another explosion, it was massive. The sheer force of this underwater shockwave was so absolutely devastating that it actually registered on seismic stations all across Northern Europe. That violent destruction instantly crippled this incredibly advanced vessel, and the Kursk plummeted more than 100 meters down, slamming into the dark floor of the Barents Sea. The reality of this moment is just so incredibly heavy. Picture this massive, damaged submarine settling into the cold ocean sediment, tilted slightly in the pitch black, with maybe only a few faint emergency lights glowing through the freezing water. Up on the surface, a violent storm is raging, but down below, just an eerie, crushing silence. The surviving sailors trapped inside that steel wreckage were now completely isolated in the dark, knowing their oxygen levels were slowly, inevitably beginning to fall.
Part 3. Trapped in the dark. At this exact moment, two completely different realities were playing out simultaneously. Down below, in Compartment 9, a small group of sailors miraculously survived those two devastating explosions and managed to seal themselves in the rear of the sub. They're huddled together in the freezing dark, condensation dripping from the steel walls, the air slowly filling with smoke and moisture. Meanwhile, up on the surface in the Russian naval command centers, there's a totally different kind of tension. Officers are staring at blank radar monitors and totally silent communication screens. They realize contact with the Kursk has suddenly just stopped, but they're paralyzed by confusion and severe operational delays. This huge disconnect between the desperate, freezing wait in Compartment 9 and the painfully slow realization on the surface, it's one of the most tragic hallmarks of this entire event.
Part 4. The Failed Rescue. The fate of the sailors below wasn't sealed by just one single mistake. It was a brutal cascade of barriers. First, as Russian rescue teams attempted multiple underwater operations, they were immediately hit with severe technical equipment failures. Nothing seemed to work right. Second, they were battling horrific Arctic weather up top. We're talking crashing waves, terrible visibility, driving snow and rain that made operating heavy cranes and rescue vessels incredibly dangerous. But the third barrier, that's the one that's perhaps the most heavily scrutinized, a deep reluctance to accept foreign assistance. As the crisis dragged on, intense international pressure mounted. Reporters and TV cameras crowded into government briefings in Moscow. Now, while the political reasoning behind it remains a major topic of historical debate, our sources impartially note that this specific delay was a highly critical factor. Precious time simply slipped away. Eventually, the barriers of secrecy and reluctance were finally lowered, and international rescue teams joined the operation.
Elite Norwegian divers, geared up in heavy winter suits, descended from the icy, fog-covered decks of their vessels into the freezing sea. And they did it. They managed to successfully access parts of the sunken submarine. But by the time they finally breached the interior, the tragedy was already complete. There were no survivors left. The truly heartbreaking human reality of those delays was confirmed by a handwritten note discovered by rescuers days later. Found inside a flooded compartment, illuminated only by the dim beam of a diver's flashlight, this soaked piece of paper literally changed the entire narrative of the disaster. It definitively proved that crew members had survived long after those initial blasts. They had gathered in the dark, they had waited, and they had carefully documented their final hours, waiting in the freezing dark for a rescue that simply never came.
Part 5. Aftermath and Legacy. So in the months that followed, one of the largest and most complex underwater recovery missions in history took place. Giant cranes and thick cables were used to actually lift massive sections of the submarine from the stormy ocean floors so investigators could study the wreckage. Ultimately, official military investigations concluded that a faulty torpedo was officially to blame for that initial explosion. However, as is so often the case when heavy military secrecy is involved, that official conclusion didn't exactly put the matter to rest. Controversies, classified files, and massive unanswered questions about the timeline and the true nature of the failures have continued to shroud the tragedy for years. Over 2 decades later, the Kursk remains this dark, atmospheric symbol of loss and the terrifying dangers hidden beneath the ocean's surface. But beyond the faulty torpedoes and the severe Arctic weather, this tragedy really forces us to ask a difficult question. When disaster strikes in the shadows, what is the true cost of military secrecy? We've just seen how isolation, confusion, and geopolitical reluctance compounded a mechanical failure into an absolute, complete human tragedy. It is a quiet, haunting reminder of exactly what's at stake when transparency is sacrificed. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this profound piece of history. Take a moment to really reflect on this, and I'll see you in the next explainer.